Welcome to the MOOC lecture of Pharmacology-II, subject code BP503T. I am Dr. Sardendu Kumar Mishra, Associate Professor in the Department of Pharmacology at Ramesh Institute of Vocational and Technical Education, Greater Noida. So, dear learners, today we are going to discuss about the introduction of Autacoids and the histamine. So, first of all, we can elaborate the learning objectives. At the end of this lecture, you will be able to understand the meaning, characteristics of the Autacoids, explore the various function and the types of Autacoids, and able to analyze the fundamental process in the synthesis, metabolism of histamine and the physiological role of histaminergic receptors. So, let us start with the introduction of Autacoids. So, you people are aware about the allergy. Allergy is a very common phenomena which is seen with everyone. It is generally caused due to the drug, food, dust, pollen, grains and bee biting. Whereas, in some cases the foreign particles inhaled by you may also cause the allergy. When you came in the contact of these mediators, you can develop a symptomatic condition such as redness, blubbing of skin, itching, edema, breathlessness and the bronchoconstriction. And all these conditions are attributed due to the release of certain components known as what? Autacoids. So, first of all, let us break this term Autacoid into two parts, and it is divided into two terms, auto and second one is the coids. Auto is very self explanatory, that means self, okay, and the coid is taken from a Greek word akos, which means healing or the remedy. In some conditions, people are also called Autacoids as a local hormone, despite it has a different property compared to the local normal hormones. It is responsible for the localized effect to the tissues, not the systemic effect. These Autacoids have a short duration of action due to the half life, or you can say short half life. They does not have any similarity with the general hormones. Now, these Autacoids are released from the some particular cells known as in case of histamine you can call as a mast cells, and particularly these cells are localized to a specific tissues such as lungs, skin, you can say gastric mucosa, brain. Okay. So, whereas the general hormones have a systemic effect and they are made to put their effect by travelling through the blood to the distant tissue or the organ. Okay. Now, let us explore the characteristic features of the Autacoids. So, Autacoids are the endogenous compounds, you can say they are developed from the body and degraded itself in the body by giving their effect after their effect. Okay. So, generally Autacoids are involved in the physiological as well as the pathological conditions. You can say predominantly they have a role in pathological conditions compared to the physiological one. Generally they are released during the allergy, hypersensitivity and inflammation and some cases of the trauma. Okay. So, here you can see the word allergy, which is in some conditions known as hypersensitivity, inflammation and the injury, or you can say trauma. In some conditions, the imbalance in the synthesis of these Autacoids also lead to the pathological conditions, and lastly, the antigen antibody reaction is the major condition where these Autacoids are released from specific cells and exert their pathological conditions. So, moving towards the function of the autocoids. Generally, autocoids, already I told you that they have a very good control over the physiological as well as the pathological conditions. So, autocoids generally you can say have a principal role in the inflammation, allergy, neurotransmission, gastric acid secretion, wakefulness, decreased appetite, regulation of drinking and regulation of temperature, control of blood pressure and perception of pain. Let us explore one by one these functions. Okay. So, generally you know inflammation. What is inflammation? It is the protective mechanism of a body against the foreign particle. Okay. Allergy is little bit what you can say, if it is an antigen and it enters into your body. Okay. Antigen is what? Antigen is nothing, it is a foreign particle which is not similar or which is not you can say comfortable with our body conditions. Okay. So, once the antigen enter into our body, it leads to the binding with the antibody and later on it will leads to the release of the autocoids. Okay. So, you can say by the help of these antigen antibody reaction, it will stimulate the specific cells which you can say the mast cells or some other cells, histaminocytes. Okay, and later on this cells releases the autocoids or particular autocoid associated with that particular cell. Okay. Neurotransmission, you can say neurotransmission, it has a very good role, autocoids have a very good control over the, such as histamine and the serotonin have a very potent role in the neurotransmission, or you can say as a neurotransmitter. Okay. They can control the wakefulness, they can control the your hunger center, or you can say they will decrease the appetite. Okay. Later on they also produce a satiety condition. Okay. Satiety means कि आपको भूख नहीं लगेगी, भूख आपकी जो होगी वो क्या हो जाएगी, कम हो जाएगी. Okay. In some conditions, especially H2 mediated, okay, the histamine 2 mediated receptor action was seen in the gastric mucosa, you can say parietal cells, where the gastric acid secretion was increased, and this will lead to the in particular the excess acid will lead to the development of the peptic ulcer. Okay. Already I told you wakefulness, ये आपको जगाए रखता है, because histamine has a property to crosses the triple B. Okay. Okay. It decreases the appetite, already discussed. It also regulates the drinking capacity. It maintains the it maintains the temperature of the body, whereas it also controls the you can say blood pressure by the help of angiotensin enzyme, and by the help of histamine it controls the perception of the pain. Okay. Now, let us classify the autocoids. So, autocoids are classified into 3 categories depending on their chemical moieties. Okay. So, the first one is decarboxylated amino acids. यहाँ पर decarboxylated amino acid का मतलब है, you know the structure of amino acid, it is the one end consists of the amino group and the second one second end is consist of the carboxyl group. Okay. So, by the combination of these amino and the carboxyl group, carboxylic acid group, it is known as what? Amino acid. Okay. So, यहाँ पर what happens when we discuss about the histamine and the serotonin, they are formed by the decarboxylation of the amino acid. It means this CO2 was eliminated from this amino acid, and this will give the histamine, or you can say the another one serotonin. The second one is known as what? Polypeptides. Okay. So, polypeptides you can say these polypeptides are nothing, these are the long chain of the peptides, and the peptides are nothing, they are the long chain of the amino acids. The angiotensin and the plasma kinase, or you can say bradykinin, is the example of what? Polypeptide autocoids. And the last one is the eicosanoids, which is fatty acid derivative, or you can say eicosanoic acid derivative, which consists of 3 specific autocoids known as what? Prostaglandin, leukotriene and the thromboxanes. इनका नाम इनके ओरिजिन पे डिपेंड से पड़ा हुआ है, उसको हम थोड़ा समझ लेते हैं. Prostaglandin was the autocoid which was first derived from the prostate gland, that's why it is known as what? Prostaglandin. Okay. The second one Leukotriene, it was derived, or you can say majorly found in the WBCs, that is why it is known as what, leukotriene. And the third one is derived from the thrombocytes, or you can say platelet, and that is why it is known as what, thromboxanes. Okay. So, let us start with the first autocoid, and which is a very major role in our body, that is histamine. The first autocoid, which is known as what, histamine, was discovered into 1907. It is a natural component of the mammalian tissue. ओके हम इसको थोड़ा सा और इजी से समझ सकते हैं, फिर से हम इसको ब्रेक डाउन करते हैं, और हिस्टा प्लस अमीन, इसको हमने दो पार्ट में डिवाइड कर लिया. तो यहाँ पर एक वर्ड आ गया हमारे पास हिस्टो, और दूसरा आ गया अमीन. ठीक है, तो हिस्टो, यू ऑल आर अवेयर अबाउट द टर्म हिस्टो, यू read into the APP, that is sorry, anatomy physiology. Histo means tissue, okay, and amine is the chemical nature of that particular compound. ठीक है, तो these are the component which is known as biogenic amines, यानी they are derived from the amines specifically found in the tissues. Okay, these are the chemical messengers which mediates many cellular processes. The local action of the histamine involves redness, urticaria, edema, and inflammatory reactions. Redness is due to the vasodilation. Urticaria, you can say commonly it is known as hives. ठीक है, एंड हाइव्स का मतलब हो गया कि यहाँ पर आपको दो पर्टिकुलर कंडीशंस देखने को मिलता है. एक तो फ्लेयरिंग देखने को मिलती है, थोड़ी आपको जलन, ईचिंग जैसी कंडीशंस आती है, और दूसरा आपको स्किन रैशेस देखने को मिलते हैं. ठीक है ना, तो दिस इज अ कंडीशन विच इज नोन एज जनरली नोन एज हाइव्स. ठीक है, एडिमा, nothing, it is the accumulation of the fluid is known as edema, and the inflammation I already told you, it is a protective mechanism which is you can say constitutes the secretion of the different mediators. Okay. Now, histamine doesn't have any clinical implication. You have to note down it that it doesn't have any clinical implication, यानी clinically therapeutically histamine कहीं पर use नहीं होता है. Okay. And it has a very modest role in the anaphylaxis. Okay. Now, what is anaphylaxis? यहाँ पर ये term बहुत ही नया टर्म है जो कि जनरली लोगों को कंफ्यूज करता है. व्हाट इज एनाफाइलैक्सिस? तो एनाफाइलैक्सिस इज नथिंग, इट इज द सीवियर कंडीशन ऑफ द hypersensitivity. Okay, it is the, you can say, chronic condition when the hypersensitivity is seen. Okay, or this is very dangerous and characterized by the, you can say, bronchospasm, ठीक है, loss of fluid, and in some conditions it may lead to the death also. Okay, so it is a very dangerous condition when untreated. Allergy is hypersensitivity is untreated, that may lead to the anaphylactic shock or anaphylaxis. Okay. Now, in 1920, Dr. Best isolated the histamine from the lung and liver. ठीक है, you have to remember these two origins, because histamine is majorly found in the you can say smooth muscles, specifically like lungs, or you can say skin. ठीक है. Okay, so it is a beta imidazolyl ethylamine derivative. It has a biological secretion from two type of cells known as first mast cell, and the second one is known as the non mast cells. ठीक है, नॉन मास्ट सेल्स को जनरली लोग हिस्टामिनोसाइट्स के नाम से भी जानते हैं. नाउ लेट्स सी व्हाट इज द लोकेशन ऑफ द मास्ट सेल. कहाँ कहाँ पाया जाता है मास्ट सेल? तो मास्ट सेल इज वेरी कॉमनली फाउंड इन द लंग, स्किन, वेयर एज द नॉन मास्ट सेल आर स्पेसिफिकली लोकलाइज्ड टू two particular organs. First one is the brain and the second one is the GI mucosa. Okay. Now, I already told you that autocoids have a very good role in the neurotransmission as well as the neurohormonal regulation. So, histamine is a autocoid, or you can say local hormone, which is responsible to maintain the wakefulness, satiety, or you can say anorexia. ठीक है, इन सारी conditions को maintain करने के लिए histamine जो है वो responsible होता है. In some conditions, histamine is also available in the bone marrow cells. Specifically, I want to mention the cell name, that is basophils. ठीक है, and in some plants also. Plant name is stinging nettle. Okay. Now, moving towards the degradation of the histamine, how the once the histamine its effect afterwards what happen, huh? So it is degraded by the two particular methods known as methylation and oxidation. ठीक है, हम इसको लेटर पार्ट में देखेंगे अभी नेक्स्ट स्लाइड्स में. नाउ हिस्टामिन, अब एक अगर हम बात कर लें, हिस्टामिन बन गया तो बनने के बाद इट इज स्टोर्ड इन द ग्रैन्यूल्स और यू कैन से वेसिकल्स. ठीक है, और वो जो वेसिकल्स होते हैं वहाँ पर हिस्टामिन जो है वो अकेले स्टोर नहीं होता है, उसको पहले बाइंड कराया जाता है एक एसिडिक प्रोटीन के साथ और एक हेपेरिन यानी मैक्रो हेपेरिन के साथ उसको बाइंड कराया जाता है और उसके अंदर जाकर ये स्टोर रहता है. ठीक है ना. अगर हम बात करें, अगर बीटा एगोनिस्ट हम लेते हैं और you can say indirectly if there is an increase in the cyclic AMP that may lead to the inhibition of what? Histamine release. So you have to remember that beta agonist may decrease the release of histamine. Now let's move to the biosynthesis of the histamine. Okay, so histamine is derived from the amino acid known as L-histidine. Okay, so L-histidine is the enzyme which is amino acid which is responsible for the synthesis of histamine. L-histidine is converted into histamine in the presence of enzyme known as histidine decarboxylase. Okay. Now histamine is again degraded into two pathways. First one is the oxidation, second one is the methylation. The oxidation leads to the formation of imidazole acetic acid. Later on it will lead to the, in the presence of ribose, it leads to the imidazole acetic acid riboside, whereas here the methyl transferase degrade the histamine into the N-methyl histamine and later on it will degrade into the N-methyl imidazole acetic acid by the help of enzyme MAO-B. Okay. Now what is the storage condition of the histamine? Generally I already told you mast cells are stored in the mast cell is the primary cells where the histamine is stored, and there it is held by the intracellular granules complexed with the acidic protein and the heparin. Okay. Now in blood, when histamine we talk about the storage of the histamine, so basophils are the primary cells where the histamine is stored. Non-mast cells such as the gastric mucosal parietal cells and the brain neuronal cells in the brain are the primary site of the storage, and the replenishment of the histamine in mast cell is slower compared to the non-mast cells. Now what is the role of how the histamine releases? So mast cell generally stimulate release the histamine by the two pathways. The first one is the immunologic response and the second one is the chemical or the mechanical response. So let's explore this one by one. The immunological response is nothing, it is the exposure of the allergen or you can say the antigen will lead to the production of the antibody or specifically immunoglobulin E, which leads to the binding to the mast cell, and later on this re-exposure of the antigen will lead to the degranulation of the mast cells and leads to the release of the histamine. Okay. Now here you have to remember that one antigen requires two IgE molecules for the binding. Okay. Now chemical stimulation, drugs like morphine which is a opioid analgesic and D-tubercularine may stimulate the degranulation of the cytoplasmic granules, and this degranulation will lead to the displacement of the histamine heparin complex by the sodium and the calcium, okay, and leads to the histamine release. Okay. Now let's discuss about the histaminergic receptors. So histaminergic receptors are of four types: H1, H2, H3, H4. Now one by one we have to discuss distribution. What is the location of the H1? So H1 is primarily found in the smooth muscle, already told you, intestine, bronchi, blood, especially you can say CNS and the sensory nerves. What is the role of primary role of this H1 receptor? So it mediates the contraction of smooth muscle. SM is nothing, it is for the smooth muscle. Okay. Vasodilation, increase the capillary permeability and leads to the sensitization of the pain. What is the mechanism of action which is responsible for the H1 mediated functions? So GQ, GPCR protein, GQ pathway is the main which leads to the stimulation of the secondary messenger like IP3 and the DAG, and which leads to the influx of the calcium, which leads to the release of, you can say, histamine. What is the agonist? So, histoprofidine is the agonist of the H1, whereas the chlorpheniramine and the cetirizine is the antagonist of the H1 receptor. Now, moving towards the H2 receptor. So, H2 receptor is primarily found in the gastric parietal cells. इसको याद रखना, gastric parietal cells यहाँ पर ये HCl के secretion के लिए responsible होता है. ये it also found in the blood vessels, heart and the brain. Now, if already told कि ये जब gastric parietal cells में पाया जाता है, it means what it will do? It will secretes the acid. It dilates the blood vessel, increases the capillary permeability, it stimulates the heart contraction by increasing the force of contraction. Okay. यहाँ पर जो pathway involved है that is the adenyl cyclase pathway, यानी stimulatory GS pathway है. Okay, which leads to the increase in CMP, and later on the influx of the calcium will increases the force of contraction as well as the acid secretion. Now, dimaprit is the agonist of the H2, whereas cimetidine and the famotidine is the antagonist of the H2 receptor. Now, moving towards the H3 receptor. H3 receptor is primarily found in the presynaptic location of the brain, whereas lungs, spleen and the blood vessel, it is also the minor sites of the H3 receptors. Generally, it what is the function of H3 mediated response? So, when histamine binds with the H3, it decreases by the negative feedback mechanism. It decreases the secretion of the neurotransmitters such as histamine, non-epinephrine and the gastric secretion by the negative feedback system. Okay. It is work by the mechanism of GI coupled protein. Okay. GI coupled protein is nothing, it is a inhibitory protein which decreases the CMP and later on also decreases the calcium and increases the potassium influx. Alpha methyl histamine and imitate are the agonist of these H3 receptor, whereas the thiopyramide and the pitolisant are the antagonist of this particular, you can say, H3 receptor. Now, let us move to the last one, that is the H4 receptor. Now, H4 receptor is primarily found in the eosinophils, neutrophils and the CD4 T cells. Now, what is the function of these particular H4 mediated receptors? So, it stimulate the chemotaxis of the WBC. Okay, ठीक है, यानी what is the meaning of chemotaxis? Chemotaxis is nothing, it is the movement of the cells by the influence of the inflammation or some antigen antibody reaction. Okay, ठीक है ना. Okay. Now, it also stimulates the production of the blood cells. ठीक है, यानी कि you can say it stimulates the hemopoiesis or the leukopoiesis. Okay. What is the mechanism of action? ठीक है, तो यहाँ पर GI is the pathway, inhibitory GI protein is the responsible for the you can say post receptor mechanism, and it decreases the CMP, which later on also decreases the calcium influx. Okay. Now, imitate is the agonist of the H4 receptor, whereas antagonist is known as what? Thiopyramide. So, I think this is all about the today's lecture. You people will able to explore all the concepts of the Autacoids and the histamine. Okay. So, सो हम यहाँ पर एक रिकैप ले लेते हैं. ठीक है, हमने आज क्या क्या डिस्कस किया है. सो स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम द ऑटोकॉइड्स. ऑटोकॉइड्स आर द एजेंट्स विच आर known as local hormone and having a short life half. Generally, what type of autocoids are primarily we have to study. So, these are the list of autocoids. We have to study the histamine, serotonin, angiotensin, bradykinin and prostaglandin, leukotriene and thromboxanes. Okay. Now, histamine is the compound which is generally you can say derived from the tissue. ठीक है, because histo is indicating the name tissue. Okay. Now, these histamine are stored in two particular cells such as mast cells and the non-mast cells. Okay. Now, what is the role of histamine? So, histamine is primarily involved in the allergic conditions and the inflammatory pathway. Okay. Now, what is the location? This is the pathway L-histidine. L-histidine is converted into histamine and later on it will be degraded by the two pathways, the methylation and the oxidation. Okay. Now, Okay, these are the receptors. H1 is primarily found, and in this lecture, after this lecture, in the next lecture, we can explore the pharmacological as well as the pathological conditions of the histamine, and later on it will lead to the exploration of the antihistaminic drugs also. So, this is the H2 receptor, which is located into the found in the gastric parietal cell, H3 receptor and H4 receptor. Okay, thank you.